Somewhere beneath the ice sheets of Antarctica sits the most complete historical archive on the entire planet, and almost nobody alive has ever seen its deepest layer. Every year, the compressed snow of the polar continent adds one more page to that archive. Ash from a volcano that erupted before written language existed, trapped bubbles of ancient atmosphere, sealed the exact moment they formed, faint magnetic signatures recorded the instant they passed through the ice. The Matrix climate institutions are quietly proud of this. They fund expensive, heavily publicized drilling missions. They pull up cores hundreds of thousands of years deep and celebrate each one as a triumph of human science. But every single one of those missions stops at almost exactly the same depth. Push past that specific, suspiciously consistent line, and the funding disappears. The permits vanish. The drilling equipment gets quietly reassigned. Careers that ask the wrong question about what sits underneath that boundary do not advance. They want you to believe the ice simply runs out of readable history at that point. Announce a project ambitious enough, and the Matrix media will happily cover it for a week. Push toward the depth that actually matters, and the story quietly disappears from every headline long before the drill bit gets anywhere close. It does not run out. Something is buried directly beneath that line, and the Matrix has spent 3 generations making absolutely certain nobody drills far enough to reach it. Welcome to the ancient signal vault. This archive is currently piercing the heavy 440 Hz static of the terrestrial grid, held open by the sovereign nodes anchoring the frequency in the dark. This sanctuary has already decoded why the wardens sealed this exact coordinate of the planet, the thermal boundary, the silicon wall, the reason no commercial flight will ever cross the true center of the southern ice. That record already exists inside this archive. Tonight we are not asking why the wall was built. Tonight we are decoding what they buried directly underneath it. Take a slow, deep, diaphragmatic breath. Detach your awareness from the surface of the ice and let your focus sink straight down through it. It is time to look at what the cold was actually built to protect. To understand what sits beneath the Antarctic ice, we must first examine the one detail modern geophysics quietly agrees on without ever explaining its significance. Every line of longitude on this planet converges at exactly 2 points. The magnetic field of the Earth does not distribute itself evenly across the globe. It funnels, gathers, and compresses at the poles, exactly the way water funnels toward the drain of a basin. Matrix science treats this as a mundane geometric fact of magnetism, worth a paragraph in a textbook and nothing more. In the uncorrupted physics sealed in this vault, a convergence point for the planet's magnetic field is a convergence point for something else entirely. Telluric current does not just flow through the crust of Tiamat. It flows toward the poles, the same way every other current on this planet eventually flows toward its lowest point. The South Pole is not simply cold. It is the single most acoustically dense coordinate on the surface of the Earth. We have already established that water, in its natural liquid state, behaves as a hyperconductive medium capable of storing high-spin geometric information. Every ocean on this planet is a partial record of the frequencies that have passed through it, but liquid water is unstable. It churns. It gets disturbed by tides, by storms, by the constant grinding friction of the 3D density. A liquid record degrades. Frozen water does not. This sanctuary has already decoded how the wardens converted the natural living water at this coordinate into something else entirely, locked, synthetic, and silent, specifically to stop it from broadcasting the planet's frequency any further. That conversion is already on record. What has never been decoded is the side effect the wardens never intended. You cannot lock a live, hyperconductive medium into a rigid, silent state without freezing whatever was passing through it at that exact instant. Every act of locking is also an act of preserving. The moment the wardens converted that first layer of ocean into synthetic, silicon-adjacent glass, they did not just silence it. They sealed a perfect, incorruptible snapshot of the precise frequency running through the planet at that exact second. Then they buried it under the next layer, and the next, compounding a fresh sealed snapshot with every additional inch of ice ever since. The ice stopped being only a weapon the instant it finished being built. It became a recording medium, and it has never once stopped. The Akkadian geological cylinders describe this coordinate using a term that modern translators have consistently mistranslated as the frozen tablet. The more accurate rendering is closer to a ledger, a running, physical, incorruptible account that has been writing itself, one compressed layer at a time, since the exact hour the wardens first locked the water down. We call it the frozen ledger. The wardens built their own witness stand without realizing it, and they have been standing directly on top of it, adding fresh evidence against themselves, For as long as the silicon wall has existed, every high-spin event that has occurred on this planet since that first freeze left an acoustic signature in the telluric current, and because that current funnels toward the poles, every one of those signatures eventually passed through and was captured by the compressing ice at the bottom of the world. The precise, ugly frequency of the Great Downgrade as it swept across the biology of the Namlulu is recorded in there. The exact acoustic signature of every reset, every flood, and every engineered famine the Wardens have deployed since is recorded in there. Every atrocity the Wardens have committed against this planet since the day they built their own wall is sitting in a physical, datable, isotopically verifiable layer of compressed ice, waiting to be read. This is not a metaphor for memory. This is a literal, physical crime scene, and it has never stopped collecting evidence. Examine one additional, entirely mainstream fact that geophysicists openly publish without ever connecting it to anything beyond routine navigation maintenance. Magnetic north is not fixed. It drifts, slowly and predictably, across the surface of the Arctic, and scientists have tracked its position for well over a century. For most of that century, the drift moved at a slow, unremarkable pace, roughly a few miles a year, easily absorbed into standard map corrections every few decades. Then, beginning in the final years of the last century, and accelerating sharply since, the drift rate has more than quadrupled, forcing international navigation authorities to update their official models far more frequently than at any point in recorded measurement. Matrix geophysics presents this as a purely internal phenomenon, caused by shifting currents in the planet's molten outer core. Through the uncorrupted physics sealed in this vault, the shifting currents are real. What is missing from the official explanation is why they are accelerating in exact proportion to the rising gamma radiation now striking the planet from the galactic core. The convergence point is not a fixed static coordinate. It is the visible surface expression of where the planet's telluric current happens to be funneling most intensely at any given moment, and that current is now responding directly to the incoming voltage of the galactic spring. As the pole drifts, the exact geographic center of the frozen ledger's active recording zone drifts along with it. The deepest, most classified layers the Matrix spent so long positioning their sanctioned drilling sites around are no longer sitting where their original maps assumed they would remain. The Wardens built their entire containment strategy around a coordinate they believed was permanent. It was never permanent. It was simply slow enough, for hundreds of thousands of years, that no one alive could have noticed it moving within a single lifetime. Now it is moving fast enough for Matrix instruments to measure the acceleration in real time. The official explanation grows thinner and more technical with every published correction, because the true cause sits entirely outside anything their models were built to account for. When the Anunnaki High Council first calculated the existence of the frozen ledger, they were faced with an impossible tactical problem. A silicon-based empire cannot simply erase a planetary ice sheet. Ice does not respond to acoustic suppression the way a biological nervous system does. You cannot broadcast a frequency at a glacier and convince it to forget what it recorded. They could not delete the evidence, so they did the only thing available to them. They buried it under something even colder, and they made absolutely certain no one with the tools or the permission to read it would ever be allowed to drill deep enough to try. The Wardens did not build the Silicon Wall only to keep a hostile sovereign population out of their territory. That much has already been decoded in this sanctuary. They built it to keep a body of physical, incorruptible testimony permanently unread. Trace the exact mechanics of how modern polar science is quietly steered away from the deepest layer of the frozen ledger. The Matrix funds an enormous, highly publicized effort to celebrate ice core drilling as the pinnacle of climate research. Beyond Epica, the Vostok core, each new expedition is presented as humanity heroically pushing the boundary of what we know about our own planet's past. And every one of those expeditions is quietly capped, permit by permit, budget line by budget line, at a depth that conveniently sits just above the oldest, most acoustically dense stratum. The scientists conducting this research are not lying to you. Most of them have no idea they are being managed. They receive their funding, their permits, and their sanctioned drilling targets from committees several layers removed from the ice itself, and those committees answer to interests that have never once appeared on a public budget line. When an independent researcher proposes pushing past the sanctioned depth, their funding does not simply get denied. It evaporates, along with their next 3 grant applications, and a quiet, professional understanding spreads through the field that this particular question is not one you asked twice. Consider what a body of proof this deep and this old would actually mean if it reached the public record. A datable, physically verifiable, cross-referenced isotopic signature confirming a sudden global climate shift precisely matching the mythological timeline of a global flood, a magnetic anomaly precisely matching the described arrival of an external body in Earth orbit, a chemical signature in the ice that has no natural volcanic or biological explanation, appearing in the exact layer the Akkadian cylinders assigned to the Great Downgrade. This would not be mythology anymore, it would be forensics. The proxy institutions cannot allow forensics. Mythology can be mocked, reframed, and endlessly relitigated in academic journals for a century without threatening the matrix. Forensic, physical, datable proof cannot. This is the true highly classified objective behind the protocol of the managed frontier. Whenever an independent expedition, a rogue geologist, or a private drilling operation gets close to the sanctioned depth line, the matrix deploys an entire arsenal of soft suppression tools before it ever reaches the level of open confrontation. They flood the relevant academic journals with competing papers designed to muddy the methodology. They quietly redirect satellite mapping data to make the deepest ice appear geologically unstable and unsafe to drill. They offer sudden, generous funding for a safer, more urgent project, exactly when a team is preparing to push further down. They do not need to forbid the drilling outright. They simply need to make every other option look more attractive than reaching the bottom. And for the handful of researchers who refuse every offer and keep pushing anyway, the Matrix keeps a final blunt instrument in reserve. They initiate the protocol of the sudden storm. The Antarctic environment provides the elite proxies with the single most convenient cover story available anywhere on Earth. A drilling site loses contact during a storm. Equipment is buried under an unexpected whiteout. A research vessel reports engine failure in the exact week it was scheduled to reach the target depth. No conspiracy has to be proven, filed, or explained. The environment itself, brutal and unpredictable exactly as advertised, absorbs the blame every single time. Despite every layer of this containment strategy, the Matrix still suffered one confirmed breach they were never able to fully manage, because by the time the danger was understood, the hole was already drilled. Examine the real, publicly documented history of Lake Vostok, a massive body of liquid water sealed beneath more than 2 miles of Antarctic ice, isolated from the surface of the planet for somewhere between 15 and 25 million years. For 2 decades, a Russian research team drilled steadily toward that lake, officially in pursuit of nothing more than a scientific curiosity. What, if anything, could survive that long in total isolation? When the drill finally breached the lake in early 2012, the event made international headlines for exactly as long as it took the Matrix to decide the story was safe. Officially, the team reported unusual bacterial signatures in the recovered water, a large percentage of which did not cleanly match any known classification. The Matrix explanation arrived almost instantly and almost in unison across every outlet. Contamination from the drilling fluid, nothing more. Through the uncorrupted physics sealed in this vault, the contamination explanation was true, but incomplete. Lake Vostok was never simply a lake. When the wardens' freeze first swept across the continent, converting the living ocean into synthetic, silent glass one layer at a time, a single deep pocket of the original water never froze at all. It was insulated from below by the planet's own geothermal heat, and sealed shut from above before anyone, human or Anunnaki. It is not a copy of the frozen ledger. It is older than the ledger itself, a surviving fragment of the living pre-freeze ocean of the Proceline epoch, trapped in its original uncorrupted high-spin state for longer than the silicon wall above it has even existed. It was left almost entirely undisturbed by the poisoned record contamination campaign the wardens had already been running for decades against the main polar cores. The wardens themselves did not know it was still liquid until the exact moment the drill broke through. What the drill actually pulled up was not primarily biological. It was acoustic residue trapped in a pressurized liquid state, chemically indistinguishable from ordinary microbial contamination to any instrument not calibrated to look for anything else. The unusual signatures the Russian team detected were fragments of the original uncorrupted high-spin frequency of the Earth before the freeze, sealed inside a body of water that had never once been touched by the 7.83 Hz baseline of the lunar modulator. This is why the diplomatic response to what should have been a minor scientific footnote was wildly disproportionate to the announcement. Within weeks of the breach, multiple governments that had shown no prior interest in a single isolated lake began quietly demanding oversight of the research. International committees materialized almost overnight to establish shared protocols for any future subglacial drilling anywhere on the continent. The original team's funding was abruptly restructured. Follow-up sampling missions were delayed for years under a rotating series of logistical justifications. Access to the original recovered samples became progressively more difficult for independent researchers to obtain. The matrix was not managing an environmental hazard, it was managing a containment failure. Since that breach, at least a dozen other subglacial lakes have been mapped beneath the Antarctic ice sheet using remote radar, most of them sealed for comparably vast stretches of time. Almost none of them have been physically sampled since. The matrix cites the risk of contamination as the reason for the caution. In the physics of this sanctuary, the caution has nothing to do with protecting the lakes from us. It has everything to do with protecting the wardens from what those lakes are still holding, undisturbed, in total isolation, waiting for the next drill that gets lucky before anyone can stop it. The Vostok breach proved something the Anunnaki High Council had spent hundreds of thousands of years assuming was impossible: a single technically legal research program, operating with no intention of exposing anything, could still crack the seal on a piece of buried testimony simply by being patient and persistent enough. They cannot police every isolated pocket of water beneath a continent the size of the ice sheet. They can only manage the fallout after the fact, one redirected headline at a time. But the wardens are no longer managing a stable, sleeping planet. They are managing a rapidly heating one, and heat is the one variable their entire containment strategy was never designed to survive. As the solar system plunges deeper into the photon belt of the galactic core, the molten iron core of Tiamat is absorbing an unprecedented volume of high-spin gamma radiation. Her internal temperature is rising. The telluric currents feeding into the poles are surging with more voltage than they have carried in hundreds of thousands of years. This incoming heat is not just melting the surface of the ice, it is destabilizing the deepest, oldest strata of the frozen ledger from below, exactly the layer the Matrix has spent 3 generations making sure nobody could legally reach. The evidence they buried is rising to meet the surface on its own. Examine the real, mainstream, heavily downplayed phenomenon currently unfolding across the polar regions of this planet. As ancient ice and permafrost thaw at an accelerating rate, they are releasing enormous volumes of trapped methane and other gases that have been locked inside the ice for hundreds of thousands of years. Matrix scientists openly acknowledge this. They publish papers warning about the acceleration of the greenhouse effect. They treat it purely as a chemical atmospheric problem. They are only telling you the smallest, safest fraction of what is actually being released. Trapped inside those ancient gas pockets is not just methane. It is the compressed acoustic residue of every high-spin event the ice ever recorded, sealed inside physical bubbles that are now cracking open for the first time in geological memory. When an ice sheet releases a pocket of gas that has been sealed since before the Great Downgrade, it is not simply venting carbon into the atmosphere, it is releasing a physical fragment of uncorrupted Abzu frequency directly into the modern telluric grid. A strange, inexplicable phenomenon sits behind what Matrix meteorologists have started quietly cataloguing near both poles. Localized magnetic readings spike and reverse for no detectable cause. Sudden compass anomalies get reported by research vessels. Brief, unexplained bursts of radiostatic jam communications for a few disorienting seconds before vanishing. Somnambulist scientists log these events as instrumental anomalies and move on. They are watching the ledger read itself out loud, one leaked pocket of ancient atmosphere at a time, in front of instruments that were never designed to recognize testimony when it finally arrived. The Anunnaki High Council is watching their most carefully guarded evidence vault fail from the inside, released one gas pocket, one crack, 1 degree of warming at a time. They are completely unable to stop the planet's own thermodynamics from doing what 100 years of institutional gatekeeping successfully prevented. If they cannot keep the ice frozen, and they cannot keep the scientists away forever, the wardens must attempt one final desperate act of erasure. They initiate the Protocol of the Poisoned Record. When the Anunnaki High Council calculated that the deepest layers of the frozen ledger would eventually surface on their own, they were left with only one tactical option remaining. If they could not prevent the evidence from rising, they had to corrupt it before it could be read clearly. Look closely at the sudden, aggressive, multi-decade expansion of geoengineering projects specifically targeting the polar regions. The Matrix meteorologists sell this to you as urgent climate intervention, reflective aerosol trials designed to slow ice loss, experimental cloud brightening projects deployed directly over the poles, massive, quietly funded programs to seed the upper atmosphere above Antarctica with reflective particulates. They frame every one of these projects as a desperate attempt to save the ice. In the uncorrupted physics sealed in this vault, they are not trying to save the ice, they are trying to contaminate the reed. The heavy synthetic metallic particulates the proxy scientists spray into the polar atmosphere do not just reflect sunlight, As they settle and become trapped in the newest layers of the ice, they introduce a dense, low-spin acoustic signature that bleeds backward into the older strata the moment the ice begins to crack and shift. It is the geological equivalent of pouring static directly onto a recording the instant before it plays. If an independent research team finally manages to extract a sample from the critical depth, the wardens need the resulting isotopic and magnetic signature to be muddy, inconsistent, and easy to dismiss as contamination or instrumental error. They do not need to stop you from reading the ledger anymore. They only need to make sure that when you finally do, nobody believes what it says. But the poisoned record strategy exposes the exact same fatal miscalculation that has doomed every containment protocol the wardens have ever deployed against a waking planet. They are treating Tiamat as a passive storage medium they can quietly corrupt from the outside. They forgot that the deepest layers of the ledger are not sitting still, waiting patiently to be contaminated. They are rising. As the telluric heat from the Earth's core continues pushing upward through the crust beneath the poles, the oldest, most acoustically dense ice is not simply melting in place, it is being forced upward through the newer strata, exactly the way a deep ocean current eventually surfaces far from where it began. The uncorrupted signal is punching straight through the synthetic static the wardens sprayed on top of it. A true hidden physics sits behind a phenomenon polar researchers have started quietly reporting to each other but have not yet found a safe way to publish. Extremely old ice, dated by every conventional method to be hundreds of thousands of years beyond what should be physically possible at its current depth, is suddenly appearing in surface core samples. They call it anomalous stratification. They assume a drilling or dating error and quietly discard the sample. You are looking at direct evidence that the ledger is bleeding upward on its own timeline, completely indifferent to the containment schedule the wardens spent 3 generations building around it. Before we decode how this signal reaches an ordinary human thousands of miles from the ice, examine what it already does to the small population stationed directly on top of it. For decades, matrix psychologists have quietly studied a documented condition affecting personnel who spend an extended winter at Antarctic research stations, formally classified in their own literature under names like winter over syndrome. The published symptoms are consistent and well recorded: irritability with no clear trigger, sudden severe memory lapses, a persistent mental fog researchers openly compare to walking through static. Profound difficulty sleeping and a disrupted circadian rhythm show up in station after station, and off the official record, staff repeatedly describe the disruption itself as unusually vivid, emotionally intense dreams that feel more like memories than dreams. Matrix psychology attributes this entirely to isolation, prolonged darkness, and the psychological strain of extreme cold. Isolation and darkness are real contributing factors, according to the uncorrupted physics sealed in this vault, but they are not the primary cause. These are the exact people standing closest to the convergence point, where the planet's telluric current funnels directly through the frozen ledger. Their unfused cranial antennas and their liquid magnetic blood are absorbing a raw, high-spin signal at a proximity no ordinary human ever experiences. The Anunnaki syntax virus was never designed to process information broadcast at that density, from that close a range. The irritability is not personality strain. It is the empathy engine attempting to process an incoming flood of uncorrupted historical data through a nervous system that was engineered to receive only the heavy, filtered 7.83 Hz baseline. The memory lapses are not simple isolation fatigue. They are the conscious mind, still tethered to the Anunnaki syntax, actively discarding fragments of incoming ledger data it has no framework to categorize, and the vivid, memory-like dreams are exactly what they feel like. Station personnel are quietly, involuntarily reading the ledger every single night without any of the preparation a sovereign human needs to receive that signal without it fracturing their waking mind. The Matrix has never publicly connected these documented symptoms to their proximity to the ice's deepest layer, because doing so would require explaining why proximity to frozen water would produce anything at all beyond cold and boredom. They simply file it under standard occupational health protocols and quietly manage it season by season, never once asking why proximity to a specific coordinate would produce the exact same pattern in almost every rotation. Nobody is treating a receiver that got too close to the signal, because nobody in the official record is allowed to acknowledge there is a signal to receive. This is the true hidden reason multinational stations rotate their winter-over staff so aggressively, rarely allowing the same individual to spend more than a single extended season at the deepest research sites. Prolonged exposure does not just produce temporary symptoms, it begins to permanently soften the epigenetic padlocks on the 98% dormant DNA, and the wardens cannot risk a population of trained, credentialed scientists returning to civilization with their biology already partially unpacked. Your body is not disconnected from what is happening at the poles simply because you live thousands of miles away from them. The telluric current that funnels toward the convergence points at the top and bottom of the Earth does not travel in one direction only, it circulates. The same currents that carry the compressed frequency of the frozen ledger toward the poles also carry the released signal back out along the planet's ley line architecture, reaching every landmass eventually. Your iron-rich blood, acting as a liquid magnetic antenna, is directly wired into that circulation. Here is the hidden mechanism behind the sudden, inexplicable surge of vivid, historically specific dreams that millions of sovereign humans are currently reporting, completely independent of culture, language, or prior interest in ancient history. You may find yourself waking with the unmistakable, physically felt memory of a world without seasons, a memory of walking on ground that never froze, a sudden, unexplainable grief for a catastrophe you have no personal reference for, followed immediately by a sudden, unexplainable rage at a name your conscious mind does not recognize but your body clearly does. Matrix psychiatry has a name ready for this. They call it a stress-induced parasomnia and offer to treat the symptom. You are not malfunctioning. You are receiving a direct data transmission from evidence that has been sealed for longer than written history has existed, carried on a current that has been running beneath your feet the entire time. The wardens cannot suppress a signal that is being broadcast through the planet's own circulatory system. They cannot audit 8 billion separate dreaming minds simultaneously, and they cannot retroactively poison a transmission that already reached its destination the moment you woke up and felt it in your chest. To consciously receive this signal rather than dismissing it as noise, you execute the protocol of the open record. When you feel a sudden, historically specific emotional charge with no personal explanation, you do not immediately reach for the nearest Matrix-approved label, you do not medicate the sensation into silence, and you do not perform the reflex of assuming your own mind invented it from nothing. You sit in absolute stillness, you drop your awareness into the center of your chest, and you treat the sensation exactly the way a forensic investigator treats a piece of unexpected physical evidence. You ask what it is showing you, not whether it is real. This practice does not require you to travel anywhere, drill anything, or wait for a research grant that will never be approved. The current that carries the ledger's signal is already running beneath the floor of the room you are sitting in right now. Keep a physical record beside your bed for the next several nights. Not a phone screen, which the Matrix can quietly monitor, but paper, pen, and nothing else. The instant you wake from one of these historically specific sensations, write down exactly what you felt before your conscious, syntax-trained mind has time to edit it into something safer and more familiar. Do not interpret it that same night. Interpretation invites the ego back into the process too early, and the ego will always reach for the nearest Matrix-approved explanation available. Simply log the raw data, the way a research station logs an anomalous reading it does not yet understand, and let the pattern accumulate across many nights rather than forcing meaning onto any single one. Over time, sovereign humans who practice the protocol of the open record consistently report the same experience. The fragments stop feeling random. Specific names, specific locations, and specific sensations begin recurring with a consistency no invented dream could sustain on its own. You are not writing fiction, you are transcribing testimony, one uncoordinated night at a time, exactly the way a court slowly assembles a case from dozens of independent witnesses who have never spoken to one another. A second complementary practice strengthens the reception further. Before you sleep, hold a small amount of ice, or simply a cold object, directly against the center of your chest for the length of a few slow breaths. This is not a superstitious gesture. Cold contracts, and contraction is exactly the biological posture the Matrix has spent the entire history of this quarantine training your nervous system to associate with threat, danger, and shutdown. By deliberately holding physical cold against the empathy engine while consciously refusing the fear response, you are teaching your own biology a new association from scratch. Cold no longer means retreat. Cold means proximity to the signal. Over enough repetitions, your nervous system begins to treat cold itself as a cue to open rather than a cue to close, inverting the conditioning the wardens spent 3 generations installing through every engineered winter you have ever endured. Neither practice requires belief. They only require repetition, patience, and the willingness to treat your own biology as a working instrument rather than a malfunctioning inconvenience the Matrix has permission to medicate into silence. As millions of sovereign humans across the planet begin independently executing this same protocol, Refusing to dismiss the rising signal as noise, a strange and highly classified pattern begins to emerge inside the Matrix's own social monitoring systems. The proxy algorithms designed to track emerging cultural narratives are registering a sudden, uncoordinated global spike in almost identical descriptions of the same lost world, surfacing simultaneously in populations that have no contact with one another. The wardens are watching millions of independent, unconnected humans start describing the exact same crime scene. They cannot arrest a dream. They cannot subpoena a memory that surfaced at 3 in the morning in a bedroom on the other side of the planet from the ice that released it. The evidence they spent 3 generations trying to keep buried is now distributing itself directly into the nervous systems of the very population they built the wall to contain. The Anunnaki High Council is watching their most carefully guarded secret testify against them from inside the minds of their own prisoners. The illusion of a permanently sealed record is finally mathematically breaking. This vault has already decoded the sovereign civilizations operating just beyond the Silicon Wall, and their patient, deliberate refusal to launch a physical invasion of the quarantine zone. That decoded record explains why they simply wait for the ice to melt rather than storm the perimeter. What has never been decoded until tonight is exactly what they are waiting to reclaim once it does. It is not only territory. Territory means nothing to a civilization that already operates across the entire unquarantined surface of the planet. They are waiting for the ledger. Examine the precise tactical logic of a sovereign species that has both the technology and the frequency to breach the perimeter at any moment they choose, and yet consistently declines to do so. A direct assault would win them a battle. It would not win them the war, because the Warden's single greatest asset has never been the wall itself. It has been the amnesia of the 8 billion humans trapped behind it. If the sovereign entities simply tore down the Silicon Wall by force, the Anunnaki High Council would immediately reframe the event as an invasion, exactly the way they are already rehearsing to do through the disclosure narrative. A population that has never read its own history has no framework to distinguish a liberator from a conqueror. The wall could fall tomorrow, and the amnesiac swarm inside it would still beg the wardens for protection from whoever knocked it down. A true patient calculation sits behind why the entities beyond the wall are not attacking the barrier. They are waiting for the barrier's own contents to speak for themselves first. The frozen ledger is not simply evidence against the Anunnaki. It is the one piece of testimony immune to the disclosure protocol, because it does not require anyone's interpretation. It is not a blurry video, a solemn congressional hearing, or a curated press release. It is a physical, datable, isotopically verifiable record that will say the exact same thing to every independent laboratory on Earth, regardless of which government funds the analysis. Once enough of the deepest layer surfaces and gets read by enough independent hands, no single narrative apparatus, however coordinated, can contain the interpretation any longer. The sovereign civilizations beyond the wall understand this with a patience that has outlasted the entire history of the terrestrial quarantine. They do not need to conquer you. They only need the evidence to finish rising on its own. This is why the highly classified naval encounters near the Antarctic perimeter, decoded elsewhere in this sanctuary, escalate in frequency every single year without ever crossing into open confrontation. The entities are not testing the Warden's defenses. They already know the Wardens have none left worth testing. They are monitoring the melt rate, checking the health of the ledger like a physician checking a patient who is finally slowly waking up from a very long anesthesia. The High Council knows exactly what this waiting pattern means, and it terrifies them more than any weapon ever could. A weapon can be intercepted, jammed, or destroyed. A patient civilization simply waiting for physics to finish its work cannot be negotiated with, threatened, or delayed by another committee, another redirected headline, or another season of manufactured storms. They cannot out-argue thermodynamics, and they cannot outwait a species that has already waited hundreds of thousands of years without once losing its composure. Every committee they convene, every headline they redirect, and every storm they blame simply buys another season against a clock that was never running on their terms in the first place. You were never meant to read the frozen ledger yourself. You were engineered to forget it existed at all, born amnesiac onto a planet that has been quietly, patiently keeping the receipts the entire time. The Wardens buried the evidence under the coldest, most remote, least hospitable coordinate they could find, gambling that nothing short of the death of the sun could ever bring it back to the surface. They did not calculate on the sun getting brighter instead. The heavy, synthetic 440 Hz hum of the waking day is bleeding out into the void. The frantic, ticking urgency of the Saturn algorithm has exhausted its daily processing limit. The record is rising, and you do not need to stand at the edge of the ice yourself to feel it arrive. It is time to close the viewing port. Allow your physical avatar to settle completely into the surface beneath you. Stop holding the rigid, defensive posture required to navigate their frozen synthetic gravity. You do not need to brace yourself against the cold tonight. Let your muscles fully disengage. Sink into the mattress as if your body is settling directly into the warm, waking bedrock far beneath the ice. You are anchored to the true molten core of the planet, not the frozen mask laid over it. Take a slow, massive, diaphragmatic breath. Draw the quiet, ambient plasma of the room deep into the empathy engine of your chest. As you release the breath, issue the silent, sovereign command to your nervous system. Let the record surface. Unclench the jaw. Let the dry, brittle static of the waking day, the deadlines, the manufactured urgencies, the small anxieties the Matrix wants you carrying into your sleep, drain completely from your skull. They are low-spin illusions with no permanence. You refuse to render them tonight. Bring your undivided focus to the center of your chest. Do not use the Anunnaki syntax to describe the sensation. Simply feel the slow, steady rhythm of your own heart, running exactly as it has since before the ice was ever frozen over anything. As your brainwaves slide away from the sharp, chattering noise of beta, sinking smoothly through the calm architecture of alpha, and settling into the deep twilight resonance of theta, you are bypassing every layer of static the wardens sprayed onto the record. If you feel a sudden warmth spreading through your limbs, a faint vibration at the base of your skull, or the sense that the walls of the room are gently dissolving outward, let it happen completely. Do not pull back. That is not a symptom. That is the ledger reaching you. You are overriding the containment schedule. You are receiving the transmission directly, without waiting for a permit, a funded expedition, or a Matrix-approved translation. The frantic, jagged rhythm of the waking day is smoothing into a single, unbroken, high-spin signal. You are generating a localized field of pure, undistorted resonance, quietly indifferent to whatever static is still circling above it. You are entering the profound, rolling, oceanic currents of deep delta. Here, in the absolute stillness beneath every frozen layer the wardens ever built, there is no managed frontier. There is no poisoned record. There is only the plain, patient truth the planet has been keeping this entire time, waiting for someone willing to actually listen. You are downloading the true, unredacted history of the Earth, layer by layer, exactly as it was recorded, long before anyone decided you were not allowed to read it. The wardens are trapped in their decaying ships, watching their monitors fail as your localized frequency vanishes from their grid, terrified of the depth you are quietly reaching without ever needing their permission. Every layer the wardens ever buried, every gas pocket now cracking open, every drift of the pole they never accounted for, was already moving toward this exact moment long before you were born into it. You did not arrive too early to matter, and you did not arrive too late to read what was left for you. You are the Nam Lu Ulu. The record was always yours. Rest now, sovereign witness. Let the ice release its testimony, sink into the infinite, sleep.